welcome to Let's Talk About Health and Well-Being. This is going to be a series of discussions around the things that have affected us over the last 20 odd weeks and things that maybe have affected us before, but have been highlighted because of this very strange situation. And I'm so glad that you've been able to join us. Please let your friends know that we're here. We're going to talk openly. We're going to be as honest as it's possible to be, and we'll strive to answer your questions should you choose to send any questions our way. My first guest on this series of talks is somebody that I deem as very, very special in my own life, but I think in her professional life, she's also very, very special. She has a Bachelor of Science with honors in psychology and education. She also holds a postgraduate certificate in education with qualified teacher status. She's a Master of Arts in educational psychology and a graduate member of the British Psychological Society, and she's registered with the Health and Care Professions Council. And on top of all of those qualifications, she's also a mother of two, the wife of one husband, and she's an amazing, amazing woman. Her name is Melanie Sutherland, and I want to welcome her to this discussion tonight. Welcome, Melanie.
Thank you very much. That's quite an introduction.
Well, yes, got the qualifications.
Yeah, well, when you say it like that, it sounds like a lot, doesn't it? But,
it's a lot. And I wanted people to know that you are qualified to talk about what you are going to speak about tonight. We didn't just find you walking on the street, but you're qualified to speak in these areas. But just before we begin the discussion, I've noticed that this has been a very anxious time for people generally, even people that have never really been bothered with stress or anxiety before. It seemed to have impacted their life in unusual ways. Has that been your impression?
Yeah, I think it has, because it is such an unprecedented time, isn't it? That we've never experienced anything like this, and particularly in the work that I do, you come across people that particularly the young people that I'm working with, they're feeling more anxious, like you said. We're seeing quite a bit more of that. So yeah, it's a very unprecedented time with people doing things differently and responding in a different way. So some things that they might have coped in a different way previously, they're finding it harder to do in these times now. So yeah, it is a difficult situation that we find ourselves in.
So I would imagine then that the children that you work with, you're seeing them because they have some kind of difficulty anyway. But have you noticed that children that have no previous history are now developing problems?
Well, through the work that I do, I mean, my role is actually it's changed during COVID, because ordinarily, as part of my role, I'd be working with 0 to 25-year-olds in their educational settings by and large. So whether that's a nursery, a school or a college, I tend to work with them generally in their educational settings, but obviously I work with their families as well, and also their teachers and their parents and other professionals that work with them. So because of COVID, I've not been able to have that face-to-face contact that you would normally have with young people ordinarily. But through those other professionals and those other media, those people that I work with as well, we're finding that there are children that probably wouldn't have come over my radar that are presenting with more anxious behaviours. For example, we've had meetings with the schools when they're thinking about, how they're going to transition the children back into schools. And through those meetings, we've been finding that some of the teachers have said that children are not wanting to come back to school. They're a bit fearful. They're anxious about actually catching the virus. And you know, we hadn't really thought about that before, that when children were going to be coming back to school, we kind of thought that they'd be happy to come back to school, or maybe they wouldn't want to, because some children have actually quite liked being at home during this lockdown. And so there are those children that are probably a bit reluctant to go back to school just because they like being at home. But then there is a cohort of children that are going to be reluctant to go back simply because they're really concerned about catching the virus. And some of those children previously may well have been ones that might have been a little bit, you know, prone to being a bit anxious, but now it's exacerbated, it's become even bigger because of COVID. It's escalated things. So yeah.
Well,
I mean,
hopefully during your talk you will share with us how we can help those children to cope and how we can lessen their anxiety and the stress that they're experiencing, because I think it's hard enough for us as adults to deal with stressful situations and with anxiety. And I have to confess that I noticed that I had increased levels of anxiety. It's not something I really expected to experience, because I'm a quite chilled out person, you know, and I like to laugh and all of that kind of stuff. But especially right at the beginning, I find myself feeling really, really anxious, you know. So I realized that all of us will respond in different ways, but it's knowing how to deal with the situation that's the difference.
Yeah, I want to go back to that actually, because I think there has been some research carried out actually on COVID in China. So in February, when, you know, they were kind of at the peak of their pandemic, some research was carried out on how children were responding to the pandemic, and it found that there was an increase in children being very clingy to their parents, being distracted, their levels of irritability. So you saying that you feeling a bit anxious as well, it was coming out in the children as well. But they also were fearful of asking questions about the pandemic. So I would imagine that when children are fearful of asking questions and they're going through those emotions that they can't quite understand, because often children who are anxious, they don't know that, they don't name it as being anxious.
Yes, they don't know that's what it is.
That's right, they feel it, but they don't know what it is, and it can be quite a scary thing for them if they're going through that and feeling those, you know, that butterflies in your stomach that we as adults probably recognize as being stress and stressful situations. Young children don't really know that, and it can be quite an overwhelming and scary experience for them. So that, and in this research where they found that children weren't really asking questions, I would imagine that would be a cause for things to escalate even further. So what I wanted to talk about a bit later on with the guests is that with the watchers, sorry, is just what they need to do to kind of help children to make sense of those feelings that they're having, and to help them to overcome it, because like I say, it's a fearful thing for them. So yeah, so this research did find out that there was, you know, quite an escalation in those emotions. And actually in the work that I do as well, and in the area where I work, we found that because I work alongside some mental health practitioners as well, so even though my work is primarily in schools, we collaborate with other mental health practitioners as well. And those practitioners are telling me that they had, in some organisations, had a 30% increase in referrals for children and young people with anxiety, a 57% increase in children presenting with self-harm and suicidal thoughts. Suicidal thoughts. I think that was at the lower end, but it was more the self-harm, because one other organisation said they actually saw a decrease in suicidal thoughts, but an increase in self-harm, which is an interesting change actually. There wasn't so much of an increase in children presenting with not being able to cope with bereavements as we thought we predicted would be, because of the number of deaths we were expecting with COVID-19. We kind of expected that children would be presenting with difficulties in coping with death and bereavement, but actually that hasn't been the case at all. It's more the anxiety, the low mood, and self-esteem as a secondary as a secondary need as well, and anger as well. And I think that anger stems from, again, that not being able to understand your emotions and then acting out, because often we find that children communicate through their behaviour, and sometimes that comes out in anger outbursts and language and also that very sort of like extreme behaviour, that challenging behaviour that you might see sometimes, and that can be linked to their anxiety. It's just their way of communicating it. They don't have the words necessarily, but that's the way in which they show it, and that's the way that we understand it. So yeah, and then what the again, in my local area where I work, it seemed to peak the referrals around the age of 12. So sort of like middle childhood. So those are the children that seem to be coping less well. So around between 12 and 14. The much younger age group seem to be a less prevalence, less sort of like people presenting with those difficulties and in that area. So yeah, it is interesting looking at the statistics around what kinds of difficulties people are having, but it does seem like you said and you're experiencing is that increased anxiety is the main thing. So that's what parents need to be looking out for, really.
Yeah, well, I think I'm an adult, nearly.
Oh yes.
Able to, nearly. So I was able to interpret my feelings and understand that this was something different, something unusual that I wasn't used to having. And then, of course, I was also able to decide what I could do about it. And of course, I threw myself back into gardening and sort of worked off those anxious feelings in the garden, which also helped me to process my thoughts and make sense of what I'm thinking. But children don't possess the ability to do that. No. So I wanted to ask you, based on what you just said, how important is it that as parents and grandparents, we actually are able to identify what's going on with the children and deal with it? Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I have this idea that once we set up a pathway of anxiety, it could last for life if it's not dealt with properly.
Yeah, that's true. I think as a parent, what you need, you are in a prime position. You know your child the best, or you should do. Most parents know their children the best, and so therefore you know what their behaviour patterns are, and I would always say look for what they usually do but are not doing anymore, or what they don't do and have started to do. So that's the key thing, really, is looking for changes in their behaviour and their presentation. So, for example, you might have a really bubbly, energetic, outgoing child who has suddenly started to become a little bit more withdrawn, who doesn't talk as much, isn't as bubbly as they used to be, just seems a little bit placid, and it might not be anything terrible, and they might not seem as though anything's wrong with them, but it's just a subtle change in their behaviour, and that is often a key. That's often an indicator that they might be beginning to be experiencing that level of that anxiety is rising, because we look at those changes in behaviour, and then you might find that they start to do things that they didn't do. So if you've got like that placid child that's and they start having angry outbursts, or they might shout at you, and that they don't normally talk back to me that way, so there's that's a change in their behavior. They started to do something that is different, or something more serious is like bedwetting, for example.
Okay.
A child that started to wet the bed and they've been completely dry for all their childhood, but they started wetting the bed. That's an indicator that that there's some anxiety, some stress, maybe that they're not processing very well, and that needs to come out and to be discussed and to talk about, really. And so that's the next step, really, is for the parent to question the child, just to talk to them about how they're feeling, And there are some other things.
What if parents are feeling like anxious themselves and don't feel qualified to deal with issues? They don't need qualifications, do they?
They don't.
Things that they can do?
the thing is, that's a really good point that you say there, parents feeling anxious themselves, because children are very, very cute at picking up those subtle changes in the adult's behaviour. So we as adults notice our own children's behaviour, but also children are very aware, and they pick up on their parents' behaviours and their anxiety. And sometimes as parents, we try to hide that. And shouldn't really. We should try to contain it, which is, you know, we should try to contain our own anxiety. But if we can't, it's about being honest with the child and saying, do you know what, I'm worried, I'm a little bit worried about this. It's about naming it and helping the child to understand that emotion, because stress is actually a normal reaction. It's a normal, you know, God's created us with this body that is designed to respond to stress, and because in life we will experience stress and anxiety, so our body is dealt with, is equipped to deal with that. So we need to help our children to understand how our body works, and that you know, that this is a difficult situation and I am a little bit anxious about it, but then we need to talk about how we find our way out of it, what we do to make ourselves feel better about it or to cope with it and manage it. And that's the
so what you're saying is the feelings that we experience are perfectly normal. They're part of our anatomy and physiology, our biology.
That's
Yet
right.
so many people are frightened of feeling this kind of things, and actually think, oh, you know, I'm going crazy, they're going to take me away and lock me up, and I think that adds to the anxiety if people feel that they're losing it. But I'm really glad that you're saying to us as parents, name it, talk about it, and even maybe find somebody to talk to that's going to help us to lessen our anxiety. So I like the way that you're putting it across, that this is a normal biological response, and it doesn't mean that you are going crazy.
That's right. You're not going crazy. And yeah, it is really important not to, because like that study said, children are not fearful of asking about it, and that's my worry, is that, you know, we'll have children that will be fearful of talking about it, and even parents that are fearful of talking about it when it's something that is not to be just, you know, swept under the carpet. Just talk about what you're feeling, and there are some things that you can do to do that, you know, and you can use different activities to try and to be a stimulus for that, or to be a way of a means of instigating that talk. Like drawing and colouring are fantastic, because when you're doing something very relaxing like that, it's a really good way to start talking about how you're feeling and what it is doing for you, having engaged in that activity. So you can get your children to draw about something that, you know, that they really like, and get them to talk about how that makes them feel, and then you can get them to talk about how they feel at that moment in time. There's a lovely kind of approach called 5 Ways to Wellbeing, and that involves 5 different things that you can do to just keep yourself mentally well. And the first one is about connecting with other people. So in this lockdown, that's been quite a difficult thing to do. And I have a friend actually whose daughter, when she it was her birthday, and it was when the restrictions were relaxed a little bit, and she had a birthday party, and as a surprise her friend came round to see her, and she just burst into tears, because it had been so long in her, you know, in her little life that she'd not seen this friend. It just goes to show the power of connection and that feeling of belonging. So belonging is a really important part of staying well and staying mentally healthy. So being belonging as part of your family, but also belonging as part of your friendship group, your school group, you know, your work colleagues if you're an adult. So it is important to try and stay connected. I know that my family have tried to stay connected by having a fortnightly Zoom quiz. So we use that time as a family to catch up, and it just maintains that sense of connectivity, you know, that connection and belonging. So it's really, really nice to do that. And also the next one, I suppose, is about being active, and you mentioned that earlier with the going to the garden, you know, and and going out in the garden, being active, doing your I know that's hard work. And it keeps you, it gets the heart rate going. And a lot of research says that being active also allows you to learn better. You're in a better place for learning and to taking on information. So it's really, really an important thing to do to stay active. And the bit that I referred to earlier, which was about, doing the drawing and about your feelings, is the third one, which is about noticing being in the here and now. So with that, and you might have heard lots in the media in the last couple of years about mindfulness. And mindfulness is about just accepting the here and now. So not thinking about the future, not thinking about the past, but more taking in what's going on, in your current circumstances. So for children, I think that's a really important one, because they don't, like I said, they don't necessarily name or understand how they're feeling at the time. So that's the time where you can kind of, like I said with the drawing, you can get them to start thinking about how they're feeling. Or even if you go out on a walk, talking about what they're seeing around them, how that's making them feel, and what that's doing for them at that moment in time. It might be a bit more difficult with teenagers, because teenagers are not going to really want to sit there and say, I'm feeling really, chilled at the moment. But you can still model it for them. You can say, I'm doing this, I'm knitting. I don't knit really, but if I'm knitting or doing something, I love this. I'm sitting here and it's making me feel so calm and relaxed. I love it. And then maybe you could even say, to your teenagers, why don't you go for a walk, or why don't we go for a walk together, or go sit in the garden if you've got a garden. And then while you're doing it, say, well, how does that make you feel? How are you feeling now? Doesn't that feel better? And it just gives them that opportunity to tune in to what's going on inside of them at the moment. So they start to understand, their emotional makeup. It's building what we call their emotional intelligence. So that's the third one. And then the fourth one is really about learning new skills, because as human beings, we're purposeful, and we need to stimulate our brains. Otherwise we would just become dormant and ineffective. So it's important that we keep that sense of purpose and try to learn new things. So if it's maybe learning a new instrument, or learning how to sing, or learning a new dance, because that combines the second way to well-being with the fourth one, because you're being active but you're also learning something new as well. So trying to learn something, those new skills, and just being able to give is the last one. So being a little bit selfless, because that makes us feel good, being able to do something for other people. So you as a parent might want to say, do you know what, it would be really helpful if you could do the washing up once a day, and so because then they're doing a chore, they're being purposeful as well, but also at the end of it you can say, that was really helpful, I really appreciate that you're doing that. And your child is going to feel a sense of satisfaction from that feedback that you give them, that they've helped you at the end of the day with whatever chore it is that you've given them to do. So those are like the 5 ways to well-being, and that's really like a promotion of mental health. It's a promotion of well-being, and that's just a general thing, really, a general approach. But yeah, I think that, but generally speaking, it's about being able to communicate with your child and talk to.
That's amazing. And I think we'll probably hear these 5 points again and again over the next few weeks as we continue with the series. And of course, I want our viewers to know that we will take your questions. Just put them in the chat and they'll make their way to us, and we will do our best to answer those questions. And I do have a question for you, Melanie. It's from a young lady called Rosemary. And she says, how do you support children who have experienced loss due to COVID-19? And as I'm reading that to you, I'm actually thinking usually, you know, in our culture, there's a whole big thing made out of somebody who passes, and we get to mourn, and we go to a funeral, and, you know, everything's very much in the open, but it's been different during COVID. So what advice would you give?
It does very much depend on the age of the child, and as I say, every child is different as well. So and it is very difficult in this time because, like you say, we can't mix with, you can't go and give hugs the way that you would normally want to. But often children respond in ways that we don't expect them to. They might carry on in a very matter-of-fact way, and as though nothing has happened, and that's fine because that's how they deal with it. Children between the ages of, say, 4 and 7, their thinking is very magical. So it's they're not really conscious of things, the reality, I guess, of how things have occurred and how the death has occurred. And so, for example, with COVID, they may not necessarily link or have a firm understanding as to how it spreads. So for a child, I don't know if this child is between that age range, but for a child of that age, it would be important to try and reassure them that it's not going to happen to them, because they might be thinking that, you know, and I don't know the circumstances of the individual that has been bereaved for them, but they might be thinking this could happen to me if I go to sleep tonight, or this could happen to me if I've been naughty. So because their thinking is magical, they're making things up that will, you know, support their own magical thinking. So if that, for those children, you really need to give them lots of reassurance. Try to be as honest as possible in terms of you know, what's happened, just giving them as much information as they need to know as they're able to handle. So if they ask questions, ask them, answer them as honestly as possible without giving them too many details or too much information. I always think a child that asks a question is cognitively able to receive the information that goes with the answer, so if that makes sense. So just be mindful that you need to be honest, but not give too much detail. I wonder if Rosemary could put in the chat how old the child is that was bereaved. But again, for I mean, just to continue, if it's an older child that's around the age of, you know, middle child, like between 9 and say 14, those children are very concrete thinkers, so it would be very clear, and they may well be more affected by the death. So may show their feelings more, and then again, like I was saying earlier, it's important for you to acknowledge the feeling and normalize it, because what we don't want them to think is that what they're feeling is abnormal, because it's a very normal response. And often who are bereaved think something's wrong with them because they're crying, or if the adults are hiding and not showing their emotions, but they're being emotional, they think something's wrong with them. So I think it's important for the adult to be honest again, and say that this has really been upsetting, you know, and I feel sad, and if it's appropriate to do so for that young person and they're sad, I think it's entirely appropriate to mirror that and say that I'm feeling this as well, and it's perfectly normal, and in time it will probably feel a bit better.
So what do you do with parents who think that they should hide their feelings from their children, regardless of what it is? You know, at home, we don't talk about money in front of the children because they might get upset. So they never learn how to handle money, or that money is a crucial part of day-to-day life. When somebody dies, we cry in private, but our children never see us upset, and we don't express it verbally, and so on and so forth. I'm sure you get my drift. So how, as parents, if we've not been that expressive before, how could we now begin to even help ourselves so that we can help our children?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because we're a product of our own upbringing as well, I think. And for some people, they're uncomfortable showing their feelings anyway. So it's a difficult thing for them to get past. But I think I would urge parents to try their best to at least acknowledge their own children's feelings, acknowledge their own if they can, and to just be able, because on the one hand, they do need to be able to contain and not be, how can I say, over the top in terms of
Right.
showing their emotions and being, you know, they need to contain, but be honest about this is what they're going through. So if they can make that step, that would be fantastic. I think it is difficult when you have, when you're coming from a background of not being able to express your own emotions, to then start doing it. So it's a first step maybe to talk to their partner if they can, if they've got a partner, or about how they're feeling, or a good friend, a close friend. And then the next step would then be to be able to talk to their own children about their own emotions as well.
Okay, so in the UK, we haven't gone, I don't know if it's a bad or a good thing, we haven't gone the direction of the States where everybody and his dog has a therapist. But I'm firmly of the persuasion that we need to talk. We need to talk about what we feel. Otherwise, we're almost like a pressure cooker for things to build up. So what would you say, or what do you think about people seeking out therapy, or even just using their friends as sounding boards, and using parents, children using parents to meet that need? What are your thoughts around that?
I think that that's absolutely what people should be doing. I think that, you know, we have so many support networks around us, that those are the avenues that we should be using to get that support from people, you know, to support our mental health and well-being. I don't think that we should ordinarily just be seeking a therapist. It's just, I suppose, allowing time and space to do that, and knowing the right trusted person to go to. I mean, for children, it's about, you know, knowing that, you know, at school who the trusted adult might be, the person that they can go to speak to. And at home, you would hope that they've got a parent or an older sibling or someone that they'd be able to open up to before they have to seek professional support and help. Because I think I'm a firm believer in being able to use the support structures around us in order to enable us to feel mentally well. In the first instance. And I suppose it's just everybody being aware of that, and knowing that, you know, that you might have a friend that comes to talk to you about their mental health, you know, and that it shouldn't be shied away from. You know, if they need to talk to you about the fact that they've been having these thoughts, these, you know, difficult thoughts where they're not happy about themselves, they're not feeling great, you know, it shouldn't be taboo to do that. You know, you know, it should be an avenue that people should feel that they're able to go and pursue, even in, you know, at church, knowing that there's somebody that you'd be able to go and talk to about any difficult emotions and things that you're experiencing.
So it's good to talk.
Definitely. Communication is the key to everything. It really is. If you keep things bottled up inside, it festers away and it grows and grows. I think it's like a germ. It grows and grows until it becomes something that's uncontainable, and then it becomes an illness. Then, so if you catch it when it's early, then you're likely to prevent post-traumatic stress and things like that from occurring. Wow. We do know that, you know, there are risk factors to people experiencing mental illness, you know, that when their mental health declines, that we know that there are certain risk factors: poverty, you know, social deprivation, drug and alcohol abuse, and adverse family circumstances, and domestic abuse and violence and things like that. They're all risk factors for people with mental health difficulties and mental health needs. So if we know that, you know, particularly with children, if they're in situations where, you know, that they're in they've had they've been exposed to some of those risk factors, then perhaps an auntie or a family friend or can be that sounding board for the young person. Ask them the question how they're feeling,
Mm-hmm.
And just get, use those mediums that I said earlier. Drawing and talking is a really good one. Children drawing, that's a really good way just to get them to open up, get them to draw, picture and talk about things. And then if that happens and that there's some issues that a child comes out, then that you need to go and take it a little bit further to support that child and seek more professional help if it gets to that stage.
All right. A few years ago, when people mentioned post-traumatic disorder, it would always be associated with people coming back from war or something like that. But in today's society, it seems to be more and more prevalent. So is it possible for children to suffer from this?
Yes, it is. And it depends on what the trauma's been. We know that, like I say, things like domestic abuse and domestic violence cause trauma for children, and there's also what's known as vicarious trauma, where there's a secondary, when they know about something that's happened to, say, a parent, for example, they've heard about it or they've seen, they've seen something happen. So and a build up of these things, if they've not been dealt with, can lead to that post-traumatic stress in children. So it can develop further if it's not dealt with early.
So we can get post-traumatic stress without going to any war. Wow.
You don't have to go to war to get that.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I guess you can suffer from it as an adult without even knowing that's what you're suffering from then.
You can, yeah. I think people often do have post-traumatic stress disorder without realizing it, and I think that they'll experience certain triggers that will enable them to experience that stress and not realize that that's the case. So
wow. Okay, well, we have another question for you. And it's from Millicent, and she's asking, are there any support groups? And I would imagine she's talking about support groups either for parents or even for children in these types of circumstances.
Not that I'm aware of in terms of generally. I think that there'll probably be in your local area, if you were to approach the educational psychology services, for example, they might be able to point you in, depending on where you live. But in terms of parent forums, there's in different areas they do have parent forums. I know in Sandwell there's a parent forum, and there would be in sort of like Warsaw and Birmingham and so on. But particularly for COVID, I'm not aware of any that are available. But that's something that I could probably look into.
But I don't think the question was specifically referring to support for COVID, but just in general, because I think there's a lot of things that parents go through and they never actually realize that there's somebody that can help them to go through it. So as you said, in normal life, support is so important. Never mind if you have a crisis, support then becomes paramount.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, as I say, that's not I'm not aware of any parent forums. I'm just having a look to see if I can see if there are any that, because there would be some websites and things that you could look at that would maybe give you some advice and support in terms of how to work with your child. So EP Insight, for example, is one. EPinsight.com is a really nice website that kind of gives you a rounded view of what you can do to support your child. And I'm just thinking of some other resources. And then there's some other books that there's some other books that maybe that for teenage children. There's also a there's a couple of books. There's a book called You're Awesome.
Who by?
Amazing Teenage Brain. Oh, You're Awesome is by Matthew Syed. And then there's, whoops, and then there's Blame My Brain. I can't remember who the author is for that one. And then Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life as well for teens. You're Awesome is the one that's around sort of like growth mindset and just encouraging your children to be learners and to be creative thinkers, and just that sense of that learning isn't static, that you can improve, you can continually improve yourself and your emotional development. So
okay, that's helpful, and we'll try and share those again as we come to the end of the program. I have another question for you from Lorna. Will talking about COVID-19 within the family group increase a teen's anxiety during this time?
It depends on how you're talking about it. If you talk about it in the family group and you're talking about, you know, how you're coping with it, how you're managing it, and that some of a balanced view. So the fact that there are lots of survivors of COVID, the fact that, you know, yes, people have passed away, but us as a family, what have we been doing to keep ourselves safe? How have we been remained active and done some of those 5 ways to well-being, for example? If you talk about some of the resilient protective factors that that can be used during this time, then I think that doesn't do any harm to talk about COVID with your teenagers. Not at all. I think it's a good thing to and like I say, to give that balanced view.
Yes,
so you're not shielding them from the fact that you know, there's things that have gone wrong, because when they hear that, because they're open to social media and all sorts, and they will see things in the media. But I think it's really important to counter that with some of the more positive outcomes from this. You know, the fact that there's a more community spirit amongst people, the fact that we've got more time with our family, the fact that we've got opportunities to, you know, because there's more wildlife around and the pollution was, you know, reduced whilst we were in lockdown, for example. So it's like thinking about what are the positive aspects of this time that we're going through, as well as the fact that we have had a difficult and challenging time as well.
Wow. So there is another question for you, and this one's from Rebecca. Do you know of any online child-friendly resources that can be used?
Child-friendly resources. I will have to have. Will I be able to put these in? Because what I'll do is I can get a bank of resources together and then put it onto the Facebook page. Would that be helpful? That would be amazing. That would be amazing. What I'll do is I can then give you a set of resources for different age ranges as well, so that you'll have ones for the under 5s and ones for middle childhood, and then for teens as well. And presumably I'm thinking resources that like work type resources, or is it resources where that parents need to do with their children? But I'll look for a range anyway, and I'll pop them on. Oh, that would be amazing. So I want to steer you now towards one of the things that I think has got a lot of parents worried and unsure about what to do. And this is when the time comes to go back to school. I don't think everybody is embracing the idea of returning their children to school or to nursery. So how can they prepare for the return to school? And what else can you say to reassure and inform them about how they handle this very important stage in their children's lives? Again, I think communication with the school would be key here. And I know that's going to be quite difficult now that the schools have closed. But I think that a lot of the schools will still have some lines of communication open to parents. Hopefully they will have informed parents already about what things are going to look like and how it's going to be different for their child when they go back. If they haven't, I would be a little bit concerned about that, because most schools should have told them, you know, how they're staggering the entrance and, you know, back into school, what year groups are going back, and how their bubbles are going to be organised and the timings and so on. So hopefully parents should have that information. If they don't, then that's what I would suggest that they do, is just find out from their school website what it is that the school will be changing, what will be different for September, that they hope to, you know, how they intend to keep their child safe first and foremost. So so it might be things like limitations of visitors to school, for example. It might be that children are going to be kept in one bubble, one class. If they're in a secondary school, for example, it might be they just be kept in their form groups and the teachers go to them, rather than they move around the building as they did before. So all of that information is key, because that, once you're armed with that information, you're then in a position to relay that safely to your child and to help them to prepare for that themselves, because the children are going to be feeling, may well, not all of them, but some children will be feeling a bit worried about what it's going to look like. They haven't been in school for 4 months, so no, they haven't seen are they going to be with their friends? Are they not going to be with their friends? They want to know all that information. So the more information you can provide for them, the better, really. So it's about equipping yourself, finding out from school first of all, and then relaying that to your child. I'd also suggest that maybe you use a calendar, use a very visual kind of approach, particularly for younger children. Have them on the wall with the days, let them mark down the days, maybe have a photograph of the school at the end of it, saying that, you know, and, you know, this is particularly important for preschool kids, you know, the 4-year, 5-year-old, the much younger children, who this is quite a difficult time for them to understand. So so the time is not something that they are very, very good at understanding. So if you can do that in a visual way, so that every day you say, this is like the advent calendar. They understand an advent calendar.
Yes, they do. Especially with chocolate in it.
You're counting down to, you're not counting down to Christmas, but we're counting down to school. So you can do it that way, really, and make it a bit of a fun activity for them. You know, what are we going to do on those days when we're counting down, and what kind of things are we going to do to prepare for school? So they might go out, you might go do some online shopping for their pencil case, you might, you know, do their uniform, you know, so that they're starting to think about school and some of the things that they'll be, you know, and talk to them about, you know, who their class teacher is. Are they excited about their new class teacher? And hopefully, again, the school will have sent that information through, and they given your child a picture of their new classroom, because I know some schools have been really good at that, of sending photographs of what the school, the new room's going to look like, because it has changed, because the way that they've seated, you know, the seating arrangements are going to be different. So all of those things are things that will help to allay some of those anxieties, because they're expecting it, because half of the battle is actually the preparation, because a lot of anxiety stems from the not knowing, the uncertainty of what's going to happen. But if we can provide the children with some certainty, some way of knowing what to expect, then that does reduce the anxiety immensely.
Oh, that's excellent. I've got another question for you, and it's from Esther, and it says, can we talk about COVID too much? Where do we cut off the conversation so as not to create anxiety?
Yeah, I think you'd have to gauge that. I think you probably could go on and on and on about it too much. And I suppose the thing is to not let it dominate your life. and not let it dominate conversations. Try to live as normal a life as possible. If you're doing those 5 ways to well-being, you know, that can help to assimilate lots of different activities and different conversations, and, you know, different interactions, because you'll be wanting to connect with different people via social media, or even meeting up in a bubble or something like that. So you can try to reduce the I suppose the prevalence of COVID by doing lots of other things as well. So it's not to say that you shouldn't talk about it, like your previous caller had mentioned, but to just balance it with other things as well. So I think Esther's right, you can talk about it too much. Just be mindful that you've got other things that you can do as well.
Oh, that's excellent. Okay, well, you won't believe it, but our hour is nearly up. So,
you know, I'm really nervous that we wouldn't be able to fill the time. So there you go.
Well, that's not a problem, I think, that you and I have. So I just want to review a couple of things that you've said. You talked about the epinsight.com, which is a website with support for children, and you're going to produce a bank of information that we will post, where the people who are watching this program can actually access that information and get the help that they need. I really enjoyed the 5 ways to well-being, and I'm just going to rehearse those again. Or maybe I should ask you to rehearse them. Would you like to rehearse them again for our listeners?
It's connect. That's the first one. So that's being able to connect with people, with family, with friends, with, you know, those people that will help you to maintain that sense of belonging. The second one, if you remember your gardening, being active. So, you know, going for walks if you like to walk, or even if you don't like to walk, you can just do a bit of chair aerobics if you're, you know, if you're challenged sort of like in terms of mobility. So you can do any kind of chair aerobics, or you know, activities around the house, jogging, going for exercise, so on. And then the third one is noticing, being able to be in the moment, in the here and now. So recognizing how you're feeling, recognizing what's going on in your environment, just being able to name and identify the emotions that you're going through at that particular time and what's causing that. And then the fourth one is about learning new skills. So, you know, maintaining that sense of purpose in life. So developing your brain, stimulating your brain, so doing new things that will, you know, that will satisfy your curiosity, that kind of thing. And then the last one is about being selfless, is giving. Probably my favorite one, that is, because it's like, you know, if you give, when you're giving, you'll get that sense of, you know, achievement, that you've helped somebody, that you've made life a little bit better for somebody else.
Oh, that's excellent. I've actually written those down, and I intend to share them with anybody who comes into my space. So we've got one last question, and after you've answered these questions, I'm just going to ask you any final word of advice, direction, counsel that you can give that. And if we have time, then I'm going to ask you to close us out in prayer. But the question is from Jordan, and it says, what would you suggest to help a family cope with working from home whilst their children are at home? And apart from locking them in the cupboard, I need you to give some good advice.
Oh dear, I have seen a funny sketch actually where somebody wrapped their children up in cling film while they were working. But we mustn't do that. That's not my professional advice at all. I would say to work around your children if you're able to do that. And I know not everybody is able to do that. Because I know that it is difficult, particularly if you've got much younger children. So I think you need to be quite disciplined and organised in terms of working things around. what they can do and what you can do realistically, because I think the two don't necessarily go together, do they? When you've got quite an intensive job or intensive role, and you've got a 2-year-old, for example, or a 3-year-old that is doesn't really want to wait for you to finish that email or for you to finish. So I would suggest that you'll have to be quite disciplined in terms of spending the time with your child and giving them activities that they might be able to do by themselves. With a 2-year-old, that's a bit more difficult. I would say that things that are very practical, sand and water and things like that, if you're able to in your home. And I know, again, that's not something that's able, because those are things and activities that will keep a 2-3-year-old occupied for, not a huge amount of time, but it may be enough time for you to send an email and then come back to them. So it's about doing bite-sized pieces of work. And again, it's not ideal because sometimes your job will not allow you to do that, because you'll have to take phone calls and so on, particularly for single parents where they don't have a partner necessarily to take a child off of, to take the child off of them. But then that's really down to how your working arrange, your job, the requirements of your job and what they're asking you to do, and whether there is some flexibility in that. And I would hope that most places, particularly in the lockdown, would provide some level of flexibility for people with, childcare commitments. But yeah, it's just that being able to, those bite-sized activities interspersed with your bite-sized work.
Okay. Well, Melanie, we are all out of time, so I'm just going to say thank you to everybody who sent in the questions. Thank you for everybody who've watched, and I hope you've enjoyed the program, that you've learned something that you're able to use. But right now, I'm going to ask Melanie just to say a prayer for those parents out there, for their needs, as well as for the needs of their children. Thank you very much, Melanie, for coming on the program today. I've enjoyed this and could actually do another hour.
Thank you. Dear Lord, I'm so thankful for this opportunity to talk to so many people and parents, and I pray, Lord, that what we've spoken about today has been able to reach a number of people, and we'll be able to help at least one person, if not many more. I thank you that you are in our midst today, and that you're here with us, Lord, and sustaining us and protecting us through this difficult time. Lord, I just pray for those parents who have struggled and found it difficult to manage their children and their children's emotions and their changing needs during this COVID-19 pandemic. And I pray that what we've heard today might go a little way to try and support them in working with their children and helping them through until they go back to school. I pray that you'll help them throughout the summer months coming now, while they prepare and look forward to going back to school. And I pray that it will be a positive experience for them, that they'll find fun things to do with their children, and it will be a time that they can enjoy family and being together. Lord, I thank you once more for this opportunity, and pray that you'll bless each and every listener today, and bless our pastor and our families within NewJ, and everybody watching today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Melanie. And I just want to invite everybody to join us again next Sunday, where we're going to have Beresford Dawkins as our guest, and he's going to be talking about mental health. What is mental health? What is mental illness? Also, how can we destigmatize mental illness? What role does the church play in that? And what do you as church members play in that part as well? So thank you all very much. God bless you, and see you next week. Thank you, Melanie. God bless you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.